We'll get underway. My name's Andrew Barry. I'm in the teaching staff here at the university. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here to the third Fast Forward lecture of the 2024 series. So this is the last of the three that we're doing this semester. Welcome. Health and safety. If you need a bathroom, head outside and head anti-clockwise around the building. The bathrooms are just next door. In the unlikely event of an emergency, head out through the doors, and the gathering spot is out on Simon Street. We're tremendously grateful for the support that JIB gives to this lecture series. We couldn't do what we do without their support, so I'm just going to welcome John Kitchen, who's the area sales manager for JIB, to say a few words.
Thank you, Andrew. As you see on here, we've proudly sponsored the Fast Forward series, and Andrew and I were just talking earlier, for 17 years now. But tonight, particularly, I think the proudly sponsored is extremely privileged to sponsor tonight's speaker. Unbeknownst to Pip, he's had quite an influence on my career as a young architectural rep many years ago, as you can tell. Pip's team actually helped me write my first brochure and get it into the various building code compliance and knock it into shape. So what you probably don't know is how much Pip and his colleagues have contributed to the industry. And they're very much, that part of it, I suppose, has been kept below the radar for a number of reasons. But please enjoy tonight. You'll see a video shortly of our new Tauranga factory. It's up and running, heaps of capacity, so no problems there anymore. And been a real journey for us. A lot harder to get up to the standard that we set ourselves. It's not just a plasterboard plant; it's a JIB plasterboard plant. So hopefully you'll see. Many years to come, you'll see the output from it. And not to dissuade from our Christchurch plant, we still have Christchurch plant as well. So yeah, both islands and both plants running extremely well. So
thank you.
Welcome.
Sound, eh? Thank you. Again, thanks to JIB. I'm going to strongly encourage you, when you go into the office tomorrow morning, to specify JIB not just on the inside of your building, but on the outside of your building, which is actually a thing you can do now. It's called Weatherline, so JIB on the outside. So it's a real kind of personal treat for me to introduce Pip. Like I think a lot of folk here, I'm someone that has kind of benefited greatly from spending some time and kind of close in Pip's orbit, and I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now had it not been for that kind of time under his influence. And you know, the what's occasioned this event is, you know, the profession and the academy are very good at kind of giving ourselves awards and prizes and things, and certainly Pip has collected up literally all of those. And here in the academy, he's been a distinguished professor, an adjunct professor, and also a distinguished alumni for the institute at the institute. Local awards, national awards, been president of the institute, gold medalist. Literally everything that the Institute has on offer. But every now and then something kind of interesting happens and society in general starts to pay attention to architecture. And so this year Pip was announced as the recipient of the Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, which is something really special when essentially the nation looks on and wants to bestow that kind of honour on one of our family. So that's a kind of lovely moment to celebrate. So what I'm going to ask you to do is a round of applause to welcome Pip and also congratulate him on his CNZM.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Very gracious introduction. We had the pleasure of working together for 3 or 4, 5 years, something like that, and working on Block, which was a project dear to our hearts, the local newsletter, broadsheet, and begot the maps of New Zealand architecture, which Andrew is carrying on, and are just an invaluable guide to our history. If we don't know ourselves, how can we do anything? So thank you for that. And also thank you, John. It's a rare honour to be introduced as somebody who helped you meet code. I was a bit uncertain about what to talk about. And so I asked Valentina, who works very closely to our studio, very close to our studio, and makes great coffee. And she said that I should give a sort of overview of things, and a few hot tips would be good, and a wee bit of experience of what I've been up to. So this is a bit of a grab bag. I grew up on the waterfront, not here, this is Lake Taupo, but not unlike where I grew up in Christchurch on the waterfront, although the sea was usually a bit more turbulent. But I spent a lot of time there. I was hospitalised when I was very young for some operations on my leg, and so I spent quite a lot of time gazing out to sea, and I didn't see a sort of murky island in the distance. I saw the seaward Kaikoras. But not long after that, I started spending a lot of time bobbing around in the water like these people are. And so there was a sense of observing the world. And over the road from where I was propped up in bed, they were building a seawall. They were stabilising the waterfront at Sumner. And it had been dunes when I was very, very young, but they dumped a lot of rocks there in order to stabilise it because the sea was eating it away, and then built a seawall. And so I was propped up there watching the trucks coming and going, and there was a sense of watching things happening out there. But eventually I got upright and mobile and started heading out into the country and seeing a bit of it. And when I was a teenager, I guess, I started heading off over to Banks Peninsula. And this is Raupo Bay, a very interesting little bay. It's one of the few bays that has no occupation within the bay, or no permanent occupation within the bay. And so we would drive along down those headlands and then have to walk down the hill with our surfboards and surf these lovely, lonely, empty beaches. But it wasn't totally unoccupied. As you can see, this little house up here is a very beautiful, lonely house that I thought added a great deal to the bay, really. I mean, look, one loves a good empty bay, and particularly if there are no other surfers around, that's the best thing that we might hope for. But there is a sort of poignancy about that occupation at the base of the cliff that I thought was really lovely. And as one gets a bit closer to it, you see the footprints and the surfboards leaning against the wall. Quite a lovely little place. A bit further away, North Africa, a building on a hillside. And again, you know, this extraordinary sense of occupation of the landscape, that the role of the hill is beautiful, as the role of the Banks Peninsula hills is very beautiful, very evocative. There's something about the construction of a building within that landscape that energises and excites it for me. So this is Stowe in England, you know, the classic kind of manufactured and carefully considered view, looking down the pond and then to the folly at the end, and then looking back, claiming the whole of this valley with the eye travelling to the horizon, and then the obelisk marking the extent of one's view, and then inviting you, of course, to view beyond that. Our buildings are not quite so considered generally. This is a little delight down in the bottom end of the west coast. And more typically, we tend to plot buildings on tops of hills. So I'm slightly uneasy, well, in fact, beyond slightly, I'm troubled by these here, but as an architect, of course, one gets a commission that says, build on top of a hill. And so sooner or later, that comes to me. And I'll talk about that in a wee bit longer, in a few minutes. This is a project that Andrew and I worked very closely on for the university at Goat Island. So this is part of the Marine Research Institute at Goat Island. And this is a building done pretty much entirely by Andrew and then constructed by Sean Flanagan, or observed and administered by Sean Flanagan. It's a dormitory building, basically, for graduate students, and it's part of a composition of laboratories. And so this is a building that is I described it, or called it, I think, the interpretive centre. And the idea was that the science that was carried on within the laboratories here would be made visible to the very many people who visit the Goat Island beach during the course of the year, because Goat Island, you may know, was the first marine protection area in the country, and it has a staggering number of visitors a year. It's like 500,000 people or something of that order. And the idea was that the university might be able to entice people.
We lost sound at the back there. Keep talking.
Oh. Are you able to hear me? Okay. Good. Sorry, the mic's not working? Talk to our man up here.
Unfortunately, there's no light. I can't film them very well.
But who's going to watch the video here? Well, turn them off. Okay, yeah. Okay. Actually, what I could probably do
Do you want me to stay put? No, there's nothing up there, is it? Oh, I see.
Yep.
Yeah? Do you want me to... Hell.
Oh, no.
No, that's a sort of epidioscope, isn't it?
There we go.
You want that on me? Okay. Goat Island Interpretive Centre. The idea was that people would be able to walk up here and go into this building and see something of the science that was being carried on in the laboratories behind it. There was a security line to the right of the building, and so that this was public access, but beyond that was the university and a no-go zone. I was quite interested here in making a building that would open itself back to the bush. The project was considered at the beginning as part of what I hope would be a mainland island, because not very far offshore is Little Barrier that is overloaded with native birds, and they're all jumping ship and coming into the mainland. And if we could establish some mainland islands, then they would be stepping stones for repopulating the mainland with birds. And so I thought that this building might open itself to the inland where there was native bush and so forth. And also I quite like the illusion of fish gills and the striations of the building that Sean Flanagan and I worked on, and the ability to look inside it so that when one was walking up a fairly steep hill from the beach, you could look in there and be enticed in. So then, sorry, I'm leaping all over. This is thinking about the little house that we bought long ago and has been our home for 40 something years. And it's always been a wee bit of a laboratory, and particularly with respect to the light that comes in. It's just a little pyramidal Victorian villa that's, poor thing's been hacked over so many times. And I enjoyed the way that it, one was able to cantilever out little bays. I mean, the house next door is 10 feet away at the most, 3 metres away. So this idea of windows letting light in, and just going back to that, on either side there is clear glass, and so one gets a view out to the city on the right and to the left to back garden. Here's a different consideration of window. In this it takes some inspiration from the way that James Turrell treats openings in a flat plane, and so I'm sure you've all seen those structures, the metallic structures with a very sharp-edged hole, and which seems to bring the sky down to the plane of the metal above your head. And so this window is purporting to do, or is attempting to do a similar thing, so that there is, this is a completed and glazed window, but no edges, no trims, no nothing. So the idea of bringing the far view onto the wall, plane of the wall. Back to the poor little villa in Freeman's Bay, and this idea of observation that I wake up and this is kind of what I see. And I love the idea that the double hung windows are changing the geometry every day, as one works against the other. The glazing bar is going to reconfigure and reframe the view. And out the back of the house, is that me?
It might be.
We'll just switch you over onto this microphone here. You're on that one anyway. Let's just get rid of this one.
Okay. Alrighty. You hear okay? Yeah, good. Okay, out the back, here the observation or the dragging of the garden into the house. So, the little villa is very enclosed form, and we had a big old lean-to out the back, and everything was tightly enclosed. And here, just opening it sideways and out with not so much sky, a little bit poking up there, and a nod and a wink to Pacific panelling that opens. But of course, this is middle-class Kiwi tipping a wink to the islands, the propped bit of plywood with a stick in it. But of course, this has got a few $100 worth of German engineering propping it open. So, I'm a paper tiger. Same thing up in the far north, the idea of the wide horizontal view, but something placed between the eye and the long view. And then something between the eye and the observer, and then the view beyond that again. And we all went up to a beach in the far north and stayed right on the beach, maybe 5-10 metres, no more, from the very high tide, but a very large pūtakawa between us and the sea. And so one had that sort of mediated view all the time, a mid-ground. And the strength of that is, really etched on the imagination. So here, this is an aerial of Northland. And it's just a note of the spectacular land that is so accessible, so close to us. And this little project that I did, this is going back an awfully long time, on a hillside that purported to be a bure. Well, in fact, we had an argument about it, that for me, I'd spent more time in Tonga, so it was a whale. For the owner, he'd spent more time in Fiji, so it was a bure. Whatever. It was a building that sought to occupy a very distinct bit of land, a peninsula that was shaped like a whale and was known as the whale's back. And so this development runs along a ridge and in fact has a road that runs right through it, a path that runs through it. And so the path is a remnant of, I think, an old walking track that went up the coast. And so the house is opened, it's not really the house, the whale is opened to allow this passage through here. But then within the building creates this very strong enclosure, and the outside is sort of held along a way. And so whilst one has the pathway running through the house, there is this real strength of enclosure and darkness within it. A bit further north, as I'm talking project now, I guess this is about 15, 20 years ago, got introduced to this very beautiful part of the Northern Bay of Islands, and again, taking a building very close to the water's edge, and in this case it was an alteration. It was a shearing shed placed hard on the water's edge, and so we were able to do an extreme alteration. The plan and section are exactly as the shearing shed was, but I have to say that when I went up there for a visit, the builder looked at me and said, look, we've managed to save quite a lot of the old building, and so I was pretty excited about that. And then he pointed down the beach, and they just dragged the old building down the beach and reused it and recreated the same dimensions on the same site. But it did allow this very intense relationship with the sea. But even though it was very close to the sea, there are these solid elements which hold you away from it rather than opening out too wide. And so we're trying to balance the outsideness of the intensity of the water and the hills behind with the ability to shut it down and hold up with a fire, and my client's interest in South USA state music, country music from the South, mixed with a bit of Howard Morrison. So there's a balance of enclosure and the dreaded inside-outside flow. But here, the inside-outside flow, I have embraced it with enthusiasm. So the bench, in this case, rolls inside-outside, door slides across from the left. And again, the building is open on both sides like the project at Whale Bay. It offers this very intense relationship with the ocean. And then sitting in behind it is a hillside that I was invited to mess about with. And so there was an American landscape architect who came out and proposed that that hillside be carved into a spherical, or a section of a sphere. And I did a large number of drawings of contour lines of how the land was at the time, which was a very broken valley, and then what would have to happen to it in order to form the spherical shape. Went up there and had a long conversation with the bulldozer driver, a guy with a big guy with one of those wonderful knitted caterpillar singlets. And he looked at the drawings long and hard, and then folded them up and said, "Beautiful drawings, boys," and shoved them in his back pocket and got on his dozer, never looked at the drawings again, worked for a day and a half and made a beautiful spherical section. So this is I was invited to build a house on this top here, and I tried like fury not to do it. I suggested that it might be a number of other sites that the owner could construct on. Thinking back to the great Kiwi tradition of the little pink house on the top of the hill, I was very nervous about that. We did have 2 Pōhutukawa trees sitting up on the hill, and so I was at pains to draw those and to, in fact, keep them, because at a critical stage, the foundations had been set out. The builder rang up and said that they were going to get rid of the trees because the damn things were in the way. And I didn't actually have to go there to tie myself to it, but I was getting close to that. The house is considered as a composite of additions. In fact, it was all built at the same time, so there's some hokum about this, but the idea was that the stone element might be suggestive of something that was there earlier on. Maybe it was some sort of farming thing or some sort of distillery or whatever, and then a long barn-like form glued onto it on the heading out towards the sea, and then at some later date these low flat platforms were placed, or pavilions were placed out either side. First thing I did when I went to the top of the hill, or when I started to engage in the top of the hill, was to get a windrose for the site, and I thought that was that would help me shape the building. But of course, what I found was that the wind blew almost equal strength from every direction all the time, and so the house is essentially a crucible in order to form some outdoor sheltered spaces. And this is it from afar, looking across it. It's quite a compilation of elements sitting on that hillside, as you can see, and the critical role of Pōhutukawas that were kept. And in fact, 3 of those trees were trucked in after the event. That they not only did the original ones survive, but they gained a few friends and neighbours. As I said, the building is a crucible, and these slots through so that one is aware of the longer views that are available on this site. The site is very heavily loaded with pre-contact occupation of the land, and is also has a significant role in the first engagement of Māori and Pākehā. And so the building makes various references to that. Again, there's a corner of those of the cruciform, in order to provide a little shelter from the wind. And then this building of the tower, this remnant it was called, and we made up all sorts of possibilities of where the tower had come from, what it was about. And it was a great exercise in working the sort of geometry. In terms of its plan, it's a 2 nested asymmetrical ellipses. So they're kind of egg shape and plan, one sitting inside another with an interstitial space through which circulation travels. And then the whole thing has intarsis, so it's kind of folding in as well. And it was a pretty solid workout for our math. And this is quite a while ago, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. And first advice from the engineer was buy shares in steel. And so the final project, as I said, has these nested towers with circulation climbing up. And so one climbs up with little slot glimpses out to the far distance, some beautifully worked timber work. I'm sorry, we're going down. Sorry. And so we've ended up down in the basement, which is a cellar, wine cellar. It's part of a winery up in the north. And the building this tower is sort of considered in the Gaston Bachelard kind of model, the idea of the basement and then the mid-ground and then the far observatory. And so this is a place where one can hole up at the end of the night and then lose all track of time because you're deeply buried within there. And then perhaps at dawn you ascend up the top or passing a bedroom along the way and up to the observatory at the top. And finally one gets this little slot view across the estate. And I guess it's that observation, the horizontal, is something that's really interesting up in the north there, that the views of the sea and land are incredibly strong, but at the end of the day, as the sun moves round over the land, the ridges start to stand up. And so the big story images of sea, island, beach and so forth are somewhat secondary to this layering of ridges in the far distance. About the time I was doing that, maybe earlier, this is obviously down in the south in the Antarctic, that's Mount Erebus in the background, and Shackleton's hut at Cape Royds. And here we're seeing, I think, absolute intensity of human occupation. The stories associated with these buildings and the artefacts which are markers of those stories are so extraordinary that there is a story that on the last visit that Ed Hillary made to the Antarctic, he went out to Cape Royds to this hut, and the floor level is quite high. It's about this high, I think. And you have to go up some quite steep steps. And he went up ahead of the others, and he turned and almost fell out and said he saw the boss there. And the boss was the nickname for Shackleton. I mean, it's an apocryphal story, of course. But the place is so imbued with the history and the story of Shackleton that one believes that the character is still, if not visible, not far away. Down the coast a bit, there's this other beautiful little building. This is at Cape Evans. So this is a building that Scott left for the South Pole on the expedition, the ill-fated expedition. So he never returned to this. This is a much more significant building. It's after the Cape Royds one. And it has been described as if it were the Ritz in terms of Antarctic habitation. So this is a third of the huts down there. And my role has been as a general architect within a heritage conservation team. And much of our work has been reversing this. So this is a photograph taken really when the buildings were first re-entered. So they were built about the turn of the 19th, 20th century, and there was what was called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, pretty much ended with Scott's expedition, and then the buildings were left, and really left until the 1950s when the US mounted a major scientific expedition down to the Antarctic and reopened it. And so this is a photograph taken at that time where somebody climbed through a window and found this building in this state. And so our work has been trying to prevent this happening again. And there's a team of conservation architects and builders and conservators of artefacts, and I'm the sort of generalist, because the conservation specialists will talk flat out, backwards and forwards, and somebody has to say, well, I've heard everything, we're going that way, and that's kind of my role. The work is pretty robust. So this is conservation work in Cape Evans. Digging a trench here. There are some really interesting issues of gas exchange and water exchange. And so for about 2 weeks a year, about 3 hours a day, there is free water that moves through the top layer of the scoria upon which the house is built. So there's a permafrost, so permanent frozen soil, and then for, as I said, for a couple of weeks a year. There's loose shingle, water moving through it. Here we dug a big trench and built a polycarbonate dam to divert water around the huts because the water was flowing under the floor and freezing. So this is conservation work at its extreme. Here the floor has been lifted up. Ice and snow underneath the floor has been jackhammered out of the way, blowing hot air into the subfloor to try and dry everything out, and then replacing the floorboards. At the same time as a little container on the water's edge, these people are conserving the artefacts. So broken glass is beautifully reassembled into complete objects and stabilising the rust and so forth. But it's a tough environment. And paradoxically now, the project is having to deal with the very advanced effects of global warming. And so the issues are things like the lowering of the permafrost level. And for this hut it's okay, but one of the other huts, the first hut that Scott built, sits on what's called an ice lens, which is really like a contact lens, but vast great thing made out of ice. It's about 5 metres thick, and it's starting to melt. And so this very important hut is starting to drop. And there are also, because the sea ice is not forming at the right time, there are erosion problems and a whole gamut of stuff going on like that. Anyway, the really exciting thing is that there is some really serious science being applied to it now, and I'm very fortunate to sit in meetings where we can engage in these issues of gas exchange and temperature variations, and the mapping technologies which are applied, the laser scanning and so forth, really is giving us a huge fund of data about which allows us to make some considerations of or some plans for how we're going to deal with the projects. This, of course, is Britomart, and this project started long ago, I guess, when I was at Jasmax. Jasmax joined with Mario Madiag, who was, or is, an American architect in New Zealand. He was a man alone who did very well in the first round of the Britomart railway station competition, and then Jasmax joined with him to build the underground rail station. And then partway through that project, the construction of that project, what's called the above ground stuff was put out to bid, and this was a plan, one of many that we did, that identified the sorts of uses were going to be there. The city had a great desire to mix commercial, residential, and retail, food and beverage and so forth. And so we were coding all of these things. And there was part of a bid, a two-stage bid. One was a financial package, the other was a design package. And we worked on this design package. And I was still at Jasmax at this time. We had one great meeting where the city council came up and said, look, you guys are on the home stretch, except that you have proposed me as the project director for it, but I was teaching at university. I was running Jasmax at the time, and they said something has to go. So in that period of time, I offered to abandon my family, but they just... they said they would be back in half an hour to know what I was going to do. And so in that half hour, we made the decision to exit Jasmax startup practice and just focus on this project. The first building that we did, and remember, well, in fact, you can't remember, some of you won't remember at all. Britomart was a tough bit of town. Railway station had been moved out across to that great building that is now a university hostel. And in its place was a bus station, a car park, a very large car park, and as Nat says, it was a place to buy drugs and hookers. As a father, I didn't drill him too closely about his experience of that. It's basically 8 or 9 city blocks with about 19 heritage buildings. I say about 19 because some of the buildings are not really serious heritage listed or protected buildings, and there was a bit of dispute over one of the buildings. But this building here, this is the Northern Steamship Company. It's a building that's been altered a fair bit. I think it had an extra story popped on the top at one stage, and the gable and roof was reconfigured. But one of the things that had happened, it had been sliced on this western face, this face we're looking at on the left. It had been sliced off in order to form Gore Street, which runs from Customs through to Quay. And because of that, it had no heritage listing whatsoever, or protections, and we were able to manipulate the facade in order to form these openings down at pavement level. And this is the very first project that we started to engage in this way that the buildings might be reconfigured in order to provide, to open them up and provide places of public entertainment and use. Because they were originally built as warehouses, and so the floor levels are typically up about a metre or so that a horse and dray could back up to it, or a truck could back up to it. And so they're fairly enclosed buildings, so that level change has always been a bit of an issue to deal with. One of the other early occupations here was a project that Nat drove, and this is the Britomart Country Club. And so it was a building that made use of a corner site, the site of where the Britomart Hotel is now, and sought to introduce something of the character of what was going to come, or some of the energy and excitement of what was going to come to Britomart. And probably the first time that Nat employed the terminology of the humble special. And so these are pairings of words. So I have been using in the past the Levi Strauss term of the raw and the cooked, so that one would talk about the raw and uncivilized building, if you like, the tough, robust building, with the cooked, the machined, finely grained or finely wrought elements placed against the raw building. Here we're talking about humble materials, but manipulated in a very special way to make a delight. And so we see the apotheosis of it here, really, the shipping container with marble. And so it introduced this notion of a kind of ersatz luxury, really. And the other thing that it was the first example of, really, is starting to drill into these buildings and create linkages crossways. So that Britomart really, when we arrived, was a ring of buildings, ring of heritage buildings, construction site in the middle as the railway station was filled in, and quite hard to get at as a pedestrian. So the connection to Midtown, that is to say Shortland, High, and so on, quite tough because of the cross-down traffic from Customs, east to west traffic on Customs. And has been described often as being a moat filled with mechanical alligators, and as a barrier to that movement north and south. And so we were very keen that Britomart would do everything it could in order to provide a sort of cross linkages through that. And actually, if I just go back a tick, I just want to talk about here this, let me see, am I going to, this little lane here didn't really exist, I don't think, but we just kept drawing it on plan. And it seemed really crucial that that we could link here and here. And with the eye and that one could walk. And it became a sort of fact. So that was a really interesting kind of strategy about how one might go about making spaces. So this is the further occupation of Britomart. Early on, there was a project there for some low-rise buildings. So the concern is a very sophisticated reconfiguration of Britomart and a sort of growing of the way that it might work as a commercial and entertainment environment. And I think the city were very lucky that the developer who won the bid had quite a lot of experience in the United States and brought a lot of that experience back here, understood the importance of growing the city, that it was not a matter of making a building and then putting a for lease sign in the window, that one actually had to very carefully blow the embers of a commercial activity inside of the precinct and support the tenants. In fact, you had to create and grow your tenants. And so this is a project, you guys will recognise Grasshopper here, of working with at Milsay, a little dessert restaurant that was tucked into a space that was originally configured as a public toilet. But prior to occupation, the very enthusiastic leasing agent for the developer said, I've got a tenant who can make something out of that. And so here a project was generated that wanted to make something out of this quite robust environment built as I said, for a public toilet. Software generated laser cutting so that each of these little triangles was slightly different, a common fixing point. Each triangle was numbered, and so you would pick out number 1, put a little clip on it, get number 2, and by the time you got to about 150, it would start to curve into this complex form. And the degree of opacity would vary according to its proximity to the window. And so where the contractor had felt that it was going to be a very challenging task and therefore terribly expensive, found themselves creating this, I think, in a couple of days or so, something like that. Back to building on the hilltop in the north again. This is a project that commemorates what's described as the first formal engagement of Māori and Pākehā that was identified or occasioned as the time when Marsden arrived here under the aegis of Rata, the local chief, to bring Christianity and, I think, muskets and a few other bits and pieces. And so this project here was to commemorate the 200th anniversary of that sermon on Christmas Day that Marsden delivered. It's a pretty simple form of a building. There's those two formed rammed earth structures facing out over the valley below. The project had been through a large number of iterations as we started as a kind of library and school and accommodation, and that was a very Eurocentric reading of the history and of the site, and we backed off and formed a working group with a number of iwi representatives and some sculptors, and started to understand the land as representing two sides of a coin, if you like. On the right-hand side was the pre-contact land, and you can see in the centre of the screen remnants of the power site here. The trees up here, which we understand was the place where Rata's body was prepared for burial. On the left-hand side of the valley, excuse me, is a pastoral experience of the land. And so it's a very Eurocentric kind of use of land. There's 8-wire fences and sheep grazing and all that sort of stuff. And so it seemed, after the intensity of trying to design a building, that some observation of these two sides of the land would be much more reflective and potent way of marking that time. It was to be part of a larger series of structures on that ridge. On the left, on the left, there was what was called the gathering space, and so this was considered as a place where people might meet and discuss, I hoped, matters of land acquisition, for want of a better term. And it's a very, very large landscape. You may remember the very long ridges that I talked about, the sun bringing them into play. And so in this ridge, the idea was to somehow make a building that was strong but not, couldn't be large, because it's a very sensitive bit of landscape. And so I thought that one might have a disturbance of the horizon, so that when one was out at sea, you would look in and all of a sudden there would be some small element of it that was a kind of perturbation that was not natural in its formation. And it had as its genesis this idea that the land might be lifted up and propped up, and that there might be some play with the idea of hyper-style hall, and maybe the pangas might give rise to a order of columns, and then there would be this horizontal strip of land and of bush behind you. It didn't happen, I hasten to say, and probably not a bad thing. So this is a drawing of Nat's for a project up on the Kaipara, 2 small buildings, and sitting up there, very small, about 5 metres square, I think, and sort of 2 peas in a pod in conceptualising, but quite different in character. And that's partly to do with the interior of it. This one here is plywood, the other one is a black form ply. But the openings here are quite interesting because whilst one looks out, one also, of course, looks in, but not only looks in, one has to get in through the window. So this is the only way that one might access this building. The door slides away in behind the weather screen, and you clamber up over the rock, and in you go. And on the other side, on the downhill side, again the window slides into behind the weather screen, and it becomes a seat where you are out in the site. Yeah, so very simple plan, single story with a mezzanine over half of it. And you see here the other side of that building. It's twin, the black lined, and a little hint of the kitchen on the left, brass kitchen. You see a little more detail here. This is a bit more extravagant in its occupation of land, and I was quite keen on a building that revisited the glasshouse model, the kind of pavilion, you know, the Philip Johnson, the Mies van der Rohe. But here that we might, I'm a bit disturbed. I need to make a confession here. The cone on the left should have 2 flues here, and a photographer was so offended by the flues poking out that he's photoshopped them out. And I've had a sort of ethical dilemma as to whether I should show the slide or whether I should tell you about it, so I've come clean. When the owner saw them, the offshore owner, when he saw them, he said, "This is appalling, what a failure. Get rid of them." And so we engineered some flues that would disappear into, like telescope themselves and then pop up and distribute smoke. Thank God the cost put them off, because the detailing and weathering of it would be just a nightmare. Whatever, this is the open pavilion, and these cones are really just thinking about conversations that Pete Bosley and I used to have long ago about the sort of necessary rooms, that they would be, one would look at those Palladian villas and they would be beautifully composed and actually organised, and they would have a major room and another major room and then a salon or whatever, and then there would be something with a small bit of text on it, and if you squinted at the legend it would say necessary rooms, although they were in the manner of writing, the S's always looked like F's, you know, they had that beautiful long. And so they always became necessary rooms for Pete and I when we talked about it. And here the necessary rooms are buried inside of those cones, and so it allowed the building to be essentially an open pavilion with things buried inside of the pavilion, inside of the cones. And then they created these lovely little interstitial spaces between the cones where one could develop a bit of privacy. And then now we're leaping away off to a much more contemporary building down on Whaihanga. Very beautiful building. I'm allowed to say that because it was not done by me, it was done by Nat and George Gregory from our studio. And again, a reworking of a glass pavilion, but then coupled here with a pretty solid block of building where the necessary rooms are. And so the building is essentially this very elegant skinny roof, a rock wall that, in fact, it's a significantly large rock block that's hollowed out for those necessary rooms, and then just moving the great inside-outdoor flow, and the exterior wall is just a series of these very tall opening doors. And so, and a flue, a much more elegant flue than that other one that, thank God, was photoshopped out. And this is really where the great bulk of the living goes, except for sleeping and washing and so forth. And one retreats inside of the opening into the stone wall and comes to these very elegant places where one is alone with the view while one bathes. We're back in Britomart again here, and this is a useful overview. So on the right, underneath these roofs here, was really the first of the sort of permanent. Well, no, what you're saying, New Zealand, they're temporary buildings, because temporary means they're going to be there for, 20 years, I think, isn't it? And so retail and food and beverage, and then the black-roofed elements were a tour de force, really, that 6 months before the World Cup, Footy Cup was to be held, the developer thought it would be really good to have some retail and food and beverage there. And so in a Herculean bit of designing and documenting, Nat and the gang and Assemble from down south, from Queenstown, worked to deliver those buildings. On the left, of course, the Britomart Hotel. That was, as I showed before, the site of the Britomart Country Club. This building had its genesis about 10 years ago, something like that, with a large number of drawings done by Nat, and then achieved a sort of momentum. I'm not sure what the imperative was for constructing it, but our client is a resident offshore much of the time, and I think that it's much to our advantage that he is offshore and then travels through the stratosphere once or twice a month and has 10 hours of being up in the clouds to ruminate on the development of Britomart and of particular buildings. When he hits the ground, he knows the buildings better than we do, really. It's quite unnerving having a session with him, as he will pore over a drawing and zero in on a detail. Whatever, this, like everything at Britomart, it's been a huge negotiation and a huge piece of work, not only for the studio, of course, but for a number of people who have assisted with its construction. Not the least of which have been the negotiations with Historic Places and City Council Heritage. I've been part of the writing of rules, development rules for building mass inside of Britomart at the time that the bid was won. When we first started working on Britomart, they said, well, you've got to put some rules down. You can't put up 40 stories in the middle there. And so one of the keys was setting a sight line from the south side of Custom Street and making sure that we didn't crowd the cornice line or the parapet line of the buildings along Customs. So this parapet line had to be the horizon. And so that set some pretty ruthless controls, and there were some negotiations in order to see if we might ameliorate that in some way by other strategies that would engage with the heritage buildings around. And so the breaking down of the mass of the building into component elements, and of course the use of the brickwork, which was an extraordinary bit of engineering and facade engineering and architecture, and involves some extraordinary work here. So this is the bricks being laid into a mould at a precasting yard. Concrete is cast onto the back of it, and then the brick-clad panels taken to site and offered up into place. Again, there is this issue of humble special again, but here the materials are a little less humble, I suspect. So it's a very elegant joinery and some beautiful craft work. And here I'd really like to reference the work of Emily Priest in the studio, who has made a significant contribution to the way in which the building uses local materials wherever possible, and to a significant degree, particularly with respect to interior fit-out. The fabrics and artworks and much of the interior fit-out is locally sourced. So I talked before about the nibbling through space that the very first The Country Club project heralded. And so in here, this is the formation of another laneway connection between Custom Street and the centre of Britomart, and therefore, in the fullness of time, we hope, down to the water's edge. Here, this is seeking to obscure the difference between public and private space. And so it drills through an existing building, then doglegs around, and then opens back out onto the streets. Further up in the building, the windows are giving these little glimpses that are of these found treasures, these the old warehouse signage that's been revealed, the staining allowed to happen, the wall untouched so that one sees the foreground of the finished timbers and the brickwork, and then this sense of history sitting alongside it, well, this artefact of history. And then deep within the hotel, the bar at Kingi Restaurant, the timber taken out of the north, it's swamp kauri and cut, machined and drilled and lovingly polished, and then the light fitting above. So part of the project in the studio has been making bits and pieces, making light fittings and artefacts, door handles, and all sorts of stuff like that. And so we've been fortunate to have this canvas, if you like, in which to mount these elements. About the same time, I think, we were working on this building here. This is the old Windstone building at the top of Simons and Kaiba Pass. And it was a building that was a heroic bit of construction in the 1970s. And I think it was at a time when the industry was in deep trouble, and there were about 3 architect practices came together to make this building. Over the years, it had progressively fallen on harder and harder times, and it had originally some very lovely, fine precast brise-soleil horizontal panels, but they had started to fail because there wasn't sufficient cover on the steel, and they've been covered with Lucabond. The building, and that was kind of symptomatic of what was happening with the building as a whole. It started out with this heroic thing of a shopping mall. There was a hotel, a bar in there, offices, no accommodation. But one of the things it did do was to sit, it's this thing here. This is a view from where the toll gates used to be on the Harbour Bridge, so that big fat part where it's about 10 lanes wide. And that was one of the view shafts of Mangawhao. And this building was originally proposed to be even higher, I think about 50% higher, but was stopped when it was realised what a imposition it would make on that view of the Maunga. And so even now it breaks the height constraint. The reason those buildings are flat-topped is partly to do with this view shaft, which forms a sloping plane from one's eye to a particular elevation on the Maunga. And we were able to make use of the fact that that building poked through this height plane in order to build a second stage. But this is the first stage where we essentially pruned the building. So rather than trying to add stuff to it to make it something that it wasn't, we pruned the sunshades out in favour of a higher performance glass. We nibbled away at the corners to form outdoor terraces so that we could appear to be altering the proportion of the building when viewed from afar. It's a composite of three projects and quite complex sections that I don't really want to discuss, except that what they do is offer or have created a kind of vertical layering of occupation. And so you have the serious penthouses up the top, so there's lots of dough up there. Then you have some great views up here to about this level here, and then you start to get into a very enclosed view because immediately on the boundary there's a 3 or 4 story building. Excuse me. And so, yeah, high up you get this extraordinary view of the city. Excuse me. It's on a very high part of the city, and so offers this enormous view, and it's 360. I mean, you're around the other side of the building, you look out to the Manukau Heads. But as I said, on the lower levels, this building had been plopped up alongside. It's a car park down below and then some apartments up above it. This is before we'd done any work on the building. And so we generated some what we call warehouse apartments, which I'm really rather pleased with. So they're rectangular boxes with no view whatsoever other than about 7 metres or so across to that metallic building. And so we concentrated on trying to make everything as big as we possibly could and condensed all the necessary rooms into one plywood box, which is that dark outline box. So it has laundry, bathroom, a little storage, and then the kitchen clamped onto one side, and no other separations inside of there, so that people can configure bedrooms and work areas and living areas as they see fit. And this is a typical one of the warehouse apartments, not our fit out, I hasten to say. This is done for real estate. But you can see there the plywood box with the bathroom and so on, and then the kitchen on the right-hand side. We also, on the third stage of the project, got an opportunity to do the great over and under apartments, so circulation through the middle here, and then coming in and to one room and then upstairs to an apartment that goes right through, and then the corollary coming in here, bedroom here, down, apartment that goes all the way through. That's lovely because it gives you these apartments that are double-sided, so you get great ventilation. The other thing is that they're quite useful in the sense that you end up with a sort of isolated, that's a bathroom, isolated bedroom here, for example, whereas the main living is down here, the main bedroom down here. And so they're quite useful for the kids that come home, or that kind of arrangement of some privacy or common living on the ground floor, and then these little isolated pods. The downside is there's actually quite a lot of staircases, and well, that's all I need to say. A lot of staircases. Out west, a lot of the work we do is kind of master planning, and this is on the back of Britomart pretty much, in that we gained a lot of experience at Britomart, and also we were quite carefully educated or mentored at Britomart and into those things which will make a successful commercial environment, well, a successful, sustainable public environment. So at Britomart, for example, the developer was very keen on, or very clear that we needed this triumvirate of retail, food and beverage, and then commercial use, and that they all each needed each other, and so that the commercial tenants would pay commercial rates, but they would only be attracted there if there was good retail for the people working for them, and similarly good places to eat and drink before and after work. And so I mean, that's a real précis of really what is a very sophisticated operation in terms of making of place and the rehabilitation of Britomart. But some of those skills were revisited out here at Hobsonville Point, and these are the old hangars here, the Sunderland hangar on the left and the Catalina one directly ahead, and these were heavily manipulated in order to form commercial spaces out here. And so this is the old Catalina flying boat hangars, beautiful, big, massive concrete things with these extraordinary doors, this sort of this lattice thing here. Whoops, sorry, keep going. This lattice business here is part of a big door that was on a wonderful bit of mechanism that would roll around, and we kept those as references. Again, it's highly negotiated in terms of heritage use and what holes we could make and how we would reuse the windows. And you can see I'm returning to the sort of crisscross between the eye and the view. So this was done largely by Simon McLean in the studio, and I think Lucy involved, yeah. And so a lovely reconfiguration of that big industrial thing. Now back to the coastal edge again, and here the engagement with Rangitoto, and this building here that is a private house. Again, the Pahutakawa features large. Again, the contractor wanted to get rid of it, rang me up in the middle of a large storm saying, "It's fantastic, this is the night for getting rid of the tree," because he felt he could haul it over and then blame the tempest. And the building is really about rambling down the cliff from the flat land above on the roadside on the left, and is really a story of different engagements with that long view. And circulation is up and down this lantern. It's a very simple party for the house. There's this stair lantern, a big a wall of polished stone that runs up and down through it, and then on the other side, a series of stacked rooms starting from living space down to bedrooms and then down to a game space down at the bottom. So you see this black thing here is this wall running through the building, separating public and private. And so, you know, you can say it was a bit of Louis Kahn, served and servant spaces, those things rattling around. So high up, one has this long view across the northern approach to the harbour and out to Rangitoto, through the living level where the trees are starting to become a bit more of an element. Then one goes down, starts going down this lantern. The trees start to obscure the view and manipulate the light. And then at various stages the stair folds back on itself, and as you appear here, penultimate level I think it is, the polish of the stone reflects the tree in front of you, and then you end up in this private zone at the bottom. We revisited that project, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and formed another wing to it because that house was very skinny, just stepped its way down the cliff, and it was only about 8 metres wide at the most. Here we revisited it, and this is the tree that I'm delighted to say survived not only the tempest but the contractor. And at the end of the garden formed this little folly, it's called. So essentially it's a garden shed with a little retreat tucked on the end of it. Excuse me. It sits at the northern end of the property and shields the properties beyond it, and so it creates this open lawn in the middle and provides a place for one to retreat. And so it's quite an interesting layering of space in and out. It has a number of concealed elements, so it has a little kitchen but it's tucked away, it has a little bathroom but it's tucked away, has a bed but it's tucked away. They all sort of pop out if one pulls critical bits of wood and so on. And the space here, which is recycled bandsawn timbers and corrugated metal fireplace. And, you know, it's extraordinarily detailed and luxurious, but alludes to some earlier kind of more naive kind of construction in its sort of corrugated metal and the fireplace. I'm slightly embarrassed about it really because, you know, I talk about it as if it refers to miners' canvas structures with a corrugated iron fireplace, but this thing here costs a bit more. But I think spatially it's quite interesting because the building is enclosed very much by the trees that this photograph is taken from under. And so that terrace is really only open on the left-hand side. And it has a sort of filtered view back into the interior space beyond that. And so it is that sort of mediation of view again between the eye and the long distance, mediated by a building, and in this case those astragals or little glazing beads breaking up the large lumps of glass. And so a lot of the work has been this mediation of openness and engagement with the great New Zealand outdoors, but also wanting to provide a place which is static and stable. And so these two spaces, the outdoor space and the indoor space, have a quiet calm about them, and yet allow you, the eye and the mind, to travel to the wider spaces beyond that. Oops, okay, been there, sorry. And look, I'm just returning again here to the little villa in Ponsonby, the poor thing that's been hacked around so many times. And the creation of what I was just saying, static, stable space to sit, the manipulation of window. In this case, you can get a hint of the neighbour's house a couple of metres away, the path heading off that way. And the ability to roll back and become, or to have your imagination, your eyesight fly to, in this case, the garden, and then the pathway through to the neighbours, and beyond that again, the house that Pete Bosley used to live just in, to the right of that bamboo pole. But you are inside. There's no doubt about that. And so it's that kind of backwards and forwards all the time. And from the outside looking back in the other way. And that's it. That's me. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you. We've probably got time for just a couple of questions, but I've got one to start with, which is, thinking about, some of the very early images that you started with the kind of, this very kind of little light, kind of slight occupation of the land, of these kind of gigantic landscapes, and now, I guess the kind of question of this moment in time. Thinking about the occupation of the landscape, are there moments where you would say don't to occupation of the landscape?
Right, yes. Well, if it's done well, no.
All right. Yeah.
No, I think, I think it depends very much on the sensitivity with which one constructs in there. And I do think it's a very fraught issue because arrogantly, I would say that there is quite a lot of building that is not terribly sensitive to its impact on the land. And so, I came from the south, and so when I arrived up here, the group was always seen as being the way of landing on the soil in a light fashion and making an architecture of light timber. And then there was Glenn Merkitz touching the earth lightly, which I always thought both of them were hokum, really. I thought the group houses were pretty much packing cases that hadn't really been pulled up beyond the high tide mark. And I don't think we have a history of touching the earth lightly. I mean, 200 or 300 years ago, the hills must have been alive with people digging parapets and so forth for power. So I don't have any qualms about digging one's heel in. And at various times, Nat and I have referred to the sort of iconic moment of Don Clark digging his heel into Lancaster Park, ready to put the ball down to boot it over. That is a more enduring or more potent motif for me than the idea of touching the ground lightly. So, I'm not sure that there's a place I wouldn't do it, but I think one has to be very careful about it.
Yeah, any questions from the audience? Okay, so that's good because we've got to celebrate. We've got some food and drink waiting for us outside. Thank you to Jib. So it's good to see them. So we'll toast Jib's health while we contemplate putting that layer of Jib on the outside of our buildings. So this is the last of the lectures for this semester. What you could do is put in your diary and even have a quick Google on the phone. On July 24th, we've got Marlon Blackwell, who's going to be our international architect resident, teaching in the studios at the School of Architecture next semester. Who's an amazing guy, American Institute of Architects gold medal winner. Someone that's we're very pleased to be having with us. so put that in your diary, 24th of July. Thank you to Jib. Thank you to Pip. Let one round of applause is all that stands between us and the